The theme of tonight's presentation is Microsoft Program Management for Dummies. And not that you're dummies, but I thought it was a catchy title. And this is an insider's guide to program management at Microsoft, and the insider, that's me, because I was there for 9 years until this July. And I have done a lot of things in my career. I was a technical director at PC Week Labs, and I was an IT manager in my past life. And as I said, I worked at Microsoft for a number of years in both product and program management roles. And I was a program manager in the Windows networking group. So we ran the network stack for the operating system. I was the program manager for the Windows Firewall, if anyone's familiar with that, with the Windows filtering platform, with IPv6, Teredo, which is a tunneling protocol for IPv6 that actually puts IPv6 over top of IPv4. I'm sure that makes sense to everybody. Virtual private networks and peer-to-peer networking technologies as well. In other words, I was responsible for a lot of things that nobody ever sees. It's all invisible. It's all under the covers. Although Mike might be familiar with many of these things being in security. So, although I love that. I've always felt throughout my whole career, it's the stuff that's behind the closet that's really cool and really interesting. And when I was at PC Week, my lab actually focused on the enterprise products. So we were reviewing 8 processor servers in the late 90s, and I remember we had to have a forklift to move it around and stuff. And to me, that was so cool. This was the greatest stuff. It was interesting. At PC Week Labs, they renamed themselves to eWeek. The West Coast lab was the infrastructure group, and that was my organization. The East Coast did all of the consumer stuff. So they had all of the cool gadgets, software that people would run on there, that you would buy in a store, and they would have the laptops and so on. So like, we didn't even have, it was hard for us on the West Coast to get laptops and things. They always, my colleagues on the East Coast were always going around with the cool new laptops whenever we go to meetings. I literally was writing my stories on a 4-processor server that was sitting under my desk. That was what I was using as my PC sometimes. So this is kind of interesting. But I'll say that was I've never had a job that was more fun in my life. Not that working at Microsoft wasn't bad, but that was really fun. And so I always am been pushing boundaries everywhere I go. Even at Microsoft, I did a lot of things there. I remember I started the recession study group in 2005, and I remember this was a club. It wasn't a formal Microsoft organization. And when I left in July, there was over 200 members, and we'd be having standing room only meetings for the last couple years. And I'd organize speakers to come into campus and so on. And I remember, and I wrote a bunch of white papers about how I thought the economy would affect Microsoft and technology. And I remember one white paper that I wrote back in 2005. I was just sending around. This is all in my own time, right? This is no relation to my day job. And I remember Jim Alchin, who was one of the Microsoft corporate VPs at the time. He left. He became ill, and although he's better now, I hear. But he was still at Microsoft in 2005, and I remember I got an email from him saying, "Michael, this is very interesting, it's thought-provoking, but it's unlikely there'd ever be a significant recession, so we don't really have to think about this too much." I still have that email. And so I also, one winter break, so it was my winter vacation. I took 3 weeks off, and I spent the whole time conducting my own private research study into Linux users and why people like using Linux. And internally at the company, I know it was a really hot, this was 4 or 5 years ago, Microsoft was obsessed with understanding Linux and understanding why people, how to compete against it. But all of the research I saw at the company seemed to focus around just how do we sell better? How do we position our products to better make them sound better against Linux? And I was thinking, well, I'd really like to understand what it is that people who use Linux really like. So I constructed a big survey of my own, an online survey, And then I spent my whole winter break emailing Linux user groups around the world, asking the presidents of them if they would mind if I sent my survey to their distribution list to all their members, asking about, and I was up front for Microsoft, just trying to understand more about Linux. And so many of these people were receptive, and they would say, yes, please do. And then some of these presidents would send my request out with my URL as well. And so it was really going great. And then all of a sudden I noticed I was getting hundreds of requests of survey answers a minute on my survey. I ended up with 25,000 responses, and somebody had posted it to Slashdot, and then it got picked up in the news, and I was hearing a story on NPR about Microsoft doing research into Linux. And then I had PR people sending me emails and for Microsoft and leaving me voicemails. My VP of my division said, "What the heck's going on? What are you doing?" And it all turned out it was okay, and I explained, and there was no big problems. And then afterwards, when I went back to work and I put together the analysis, all through, I spent weeks going on a roadshow through the company telling everybody the results of all my research. So that's the kind of stuff that I do. And I've always been very, of course, again, this has nothing to do with my day job, none of these things. And I'm always very passionate in trying to do the right thing for the customers. And so what is a PM at Microsoft? Well, the program management role is very amorphous. The job title describes a wide variety of things. So when somebody says they're a PM, to some extent, when they tell me that, I say, okay, but what do you do? Because it's hard for me to just tell when they use that job title. You can be a virtual development team leader, so actually leading an engineering team to build products. That's likely the thing that most people associate with a program manager. But you could be primarily focused around partnering activities. I know program managers at Microsoft who do nothing but coordinate and talk with third-party companies, making sure that they have no problems with the products that we're coming out with, they do have plans and plans of how they're going to get these third parties and software developers to adopt things and so on, but that's what they spend their time doing, and that's a program manager. And there's also some program managers who spend all of their time doing project scheduling, just watching dates and milestones and making sure things come along. And some of those, they even at Microsoft will call them release managers, but it comes under the rubric of program management. So you'll often see program manager in the title. And there's even evangelism. So there's some program managers who spend most of their time doing evangelism, which can be a very fine line between partnering and evangelism, because a partner person is trying to encourage people to use the product. So you're doing a lot of selling. Now, I'll get into the classic PM definition. And the other thing that happens at Microsoft is that there's oscillations between generalists and specialists. And the group, over time, the way the organization's structure and how and the role they assign to PMs changes. I've seen it happen in my 9 years. So there's kind of cyclic things that occur in the waxing and waning of how PMs work, and it generally goes from being generalized to specialized and back. And so it depends on who the senior managers in your division are, what their philosophy of program management is. So that can happen as well. There's a question.
Yeah, before we go any further, can you be very clear about your definition of program and project?
So the question is, what's the difference between a project and a program? And at Microsoft, there is no job title called project manager. The program manager is the only position that they have, which covers project management. Project management is a part of the program management function, but it is the program management title is more expansive, at least at Microsoft, to cover other things. And I should stress that I'm talking about program management at Microsoft. I'm not saying this is the way it is at every company, and clearly, as you go, I know that different companies define these roles in different ways. Well, heck, even Microsoft defines the role in different ways in different groups. So you can't even find a simple definition even at Microsoft. So but Microsoft certainly does not have a project manager job description. But which isn't to say that you won't find some program managers who are doing very much what you would find a project manager at another company doing, that's just job titles. So the classical program manager at Microsoft is a generalist. That's the classical definition. So and the generalist role does a lot of things. So all of those things I'd mentioned even on the previous slide of evangelism and all of that, in the classical definition of a PM, they do it all. They handle all aspects of that. So they need to understand the market, the customers' business requirements. So they need to be a business person. They create functional specifications for the product that they're building. They have to, so they by understanding the market and customer requirements, you take that knowledge and you build specifications. This is what we need. You write down in very detailed documents, this is what we should be building. This is the types of things and capabilities that our product needs to have. And then also you need to manage schedules and keep things on track, which I would say is more traditional project management, of just managing the project. Are we on schedule? Are things going along fine? So you do that too. That's part of the classical definition of a program manager. And you coordinate the development and test teams. So the software developers, that's the development team, and the test team as well. But that gets kind of weird too, because testers are by and large software developers anyway these days. Because most testing is done through software automation. They write tools that test the software. So they're all developers, but there is a group of programmers whose specific function is to create code that you will sell, that will be the product. And there's another group of developers who create code whose only purpose is to test that software. So that's the difference between the test. But in any event, the program manager's responsibility is to coordinate and synchronize both those teams, and they are the people who are actually doing the execution, making sure that the product is coming out. And the program managers they report the status, which is part of this coordination. You got to make sure everybody knows what everybody's doing, and you do tons and tons of communication, tons and tons of meetings, and tons of emails and status reports. This is the job of a program manager. And in fact, I think there's no program manager that doesn't have that in their job description. That's part of the job description of any PM, no matter whether you're in more of the specialized role or not. And you also, not only you're coordinating between just the immediate engineers that you work with in test and software development, you are also coordinating with other teams. You have to work with the marketing group. You have to work with the documentation team. Because you, as the program manager, it's your responsibility to make sure that everything succeeds with the product. Your job isn't done just by when the code is completed and it's being tested and it's being shipped on time. Your job is done when marketing is ready to sell that product, when the product support team is ready to answer questions from customers that call in with problems when it goes out the door. And you will be the one who they come to when that isn't ready. And if the sales force has problems selling the product, they will go to the PM. They will ultimately, it'll come down, they'll ask the PM, well, what happened? Wasn't this ready? So you got to have all these balls in the air, juggling them all as you're going through the product cycle of your group. And so you have to coordinate all of these things. And you have, of course, you have to understand the big picture. You have to know what all the things are that need to happen. You can't just say, I'm only going to focus on getting the code done and making sure that happens or something. You you have to understand all of the stuff that's important to make your product a success. What is it? And that goes all the way back to the beginning of understanding even the requirements, because you were the one whose butt was on the line to make sure that you were building the right features that customers would really want to have. So, I mean, ultimately, if the product doesn't sell well, and it turns out it's because you didn't have these 3 features that your competitors had, it's the PM's responsibility. He should have known that, or she should have known that, and made sure that those were features that were put into the product. And in a company, Microsoft is a big company, there's lots of resources in the company, so there are things you can leverage to do your job, which is a great thing about Microsoft. There's a marketing department. So when I say there's all these things you've got to keep juggling, it isn't to say you do them all. You don't have to write the documentation. You go to the documentation team. You don't have to do all of the research on everything. Marketing might be able to do some customer research for you. They might be able to give you some insights into what customers want. But it's your responsibility to make sure it happens. And there are always cases where there's holes, where marketing will say, we just don't have the resources to put into doing any research, market research for you. Well, you have to figure out how to get it done. And I myself I did lots of customer surveys. So that survey I did about Linux, although that had nothing to do with my day job, I was doing tons of surveys related to my day job that were directly related to that, because I was asking customers what they wanted. And in my case, in the networking team, marketing did not have a lot of time to spend with me. And Microsoft seems like a big company, and you think, oh, they make billions and billions of dollars, they can put resources onto anything. The reality is, when you really get on a micro level, you can find out that you can't get any help with things that you want to do. And there's a lot of examples I can come up with, but in the case of like IPv6, working with IPv6, or some of these Windows filtering platform things, which were APIs that developers who wanted to work the network stack would use, marketing basically said, well, we only have so many product managers to help your engineering group, and those APIs aren't things that we ever sell to customers. They're not something that's a feature that we'll ever promote to a customer. Therefore, we can't justify putting the resources into helping do the investigation as to what those developers would want. So then that left the ball in my court to have to do pseudo marketing activities as best as I could to do that research. And so I'm just pointing out that you as a program manager, it's not good enough to say, well, they wouldn't help me, so I just didn't do any research. You need to come up with, I mean, there's other alternatives. I could have lobbied to get extra budget from my managers to go and hire some third-party place to go do research. These are all things you can try to do, but it's not so easy to get a lot of extra budget. As some people at Microsoft might know, that's not so easy to do either. And again, though, the resource thing, I think of, I don't know has anybody ever heard of Radius? It's a network security authentication protocol to make sure that only really secure, that the only people allowed on a network really have permission to be on a network. And in Windows Server, there's a Radius add-on or component in there, a Radius server that's a feature of Windows Server. And I was a program manager involved with that, and we were I think we had maybe one developer on that, on the Radius component, just one developer. And there was a competitor that we had that was a small company on the outside of Microsoft, and they had revenues of about $50 million a year, which is peanuts, but they had over 10 developers making their Radius server. And they were running circles around us with new features and things and we just couldn't even begin to compete with that. And so it's just interesting when you look at everybody thinks Microsoft is this big company that can do everything, but yet you'll find there's a lot of cases where you just can't do the things you want to do. And well, I think this is interesting from a program manager standpoint, because you take that example, you could say, well, why didn't I lobby to get the resources that I would need to do this? Well, one of the challenges that you face in Microsoft, particularly in Windows, And I will say a lot of my experiences are biased by working in Windows, which itself is unique in likely the world. And in Windows, one of the core problems that we face is understanding how much any one feature or component leads to the success of the product. And so I would go to my managers and their VP and say, look, we can't compete very well with the Radius, with this third-party Radius product that's running circles around us. We should do more investment to be more competitive. They'd say, okay, well, how much more money are we going to make? And I don't really know. And I could say, well, that company makes $50 million. And they say, well, does that mean we're just going to have $50 million and more in sales of Windows Server? And that kind of dollar figure doesn't mean anything to VPs at Microsoft. They want to hear me say that we're going to make $500 million by doing something. So it gets to be really hard. And because when people buy the product, they get everything in it. You don't know why they were buying it. What was the specific feature that they wanted? And would getting one extra feature mean that there would be more people to buy it than they were before? So that just kind of shows some of the challenges that you face. Because as a PM, you need, if you're coming up with plans for doing things with your product in the future, you have to be able to justify that to your management team, and to make sure that they will put the resources behind it so that you can make those plans a reality. So PMs are strong but powerless all at the same time. And there's a phrase that goes around saying that PMs, program managers, have all the responsibility but no authority. And there's a lot of truth to that. The programmers don't work for you. The marketing group doesn't work for you. Nobody works for you. Your job, but yet you're the one responsible for making sure that the whole product succeeds. And so how do you do that? Well, you're a salesperson. I've thought about this before. I've always thought that, the best program manager would be a great salesman. That's who they should be. They should be someone who can go in there and go into a meeting with a bunch of skeptical people, and everybody walks out thinking you were the best thing ever, and that what you were proposing is the best thing that could happen. So that's what you need to convince everybody to get behind what you're doing. And you're a missionary. You're spreading the word around what's going on. Now, there's a lot of tools that you use to do this, and even though people don't report to you, the people in your immediate engineering team will look to you for guidance as to what to do, because that is your job to help give them that guidance. And to a certain extent, some people, the software engineers don't want that responsibility. They would rather have to say, well, I don't want to make the choices of what all the features should be, because then I'll be the one who gets blamed if this thing doesn't succeed. So, hey, yeah, please tell me what you want. That's exaggerating. In fact, there are cases where the engineers have very definite ideas of what they want to do, and you have to work through that as a program manager too. So, but it's still a very fuzzy area that the world a program manager lives in is very fuzzy, because nobody directly reports to you. And that actually leads to a broader cultural thing of Microsoft, which it's a consensus-driven company, very consensus-driven culture, and it's a huge matrix organization with little central authority, and to get anything done, or most things done, you have to have mutual consent of almost everybody who would be involved. And you've got to make sure that all those people are in line, and that they agree with this to really get things moving. And the PM is the person responsible for making that consensus happen. You have to drive that consensus. And it's a failure of leadership of the PM if you go to your vice president or your senior managers with proposals of things to do, and everyone hasn't already bought into what you're doing. If there are significant people who don't agree with that, and you're going to your VP, you've failed. That's a failure in your leadership as a program manager. So you need to, before you go and make any big proposals to anybody, you should have been going and talking with all of the different groups, the key people, the people who have influence make sure that they agree with what's going on. And only at that time do you go to your VPs and say, this is what we want to do, which pretty much makes the VP role one of a rubber stamp, because they're going to approve. Everybody already agrees. Great, let's go ahead with this thing. And however, some people's opinions carry more weight than others. And you have to take that into account as you're building your consensus, because you get these people who have a lot more weight behind them supporting it. That's going to help you more than getting support from a lot of other people who don't carry as much authority in the decision making. But unfortunately, there's no easy way to navigate these eddies of political influence. You can't just look at job titles and say, oh, this person is a higher job title than that person, therefore this person will have more influence than the other. It doesn't work like that. And there are some rules of thumb, but they're not always true. So in the engineering disciplines, you have the test team, the development team, and the program management team, as I've said earlier. But in those different disciplines, there's a whole hierarchy. You have the people at the bottom who are like the worker bees who do the work, the low-level program manager, the low-level tester, the low-level developer. But then you have developer managers and test managers. But at each of those levels, they're not always equal. And I can say that in many cases, the engineering group, the developers, often have greater weight in what they say than the testers. And in Microsoft in recent years, particularly with the ascendancy of Steven Sinofsky, who now is the Supremo for the Windows organization, they have moved to an even more matrix-like organization. Windows used to be organized around something called a product unit, and so you would have a PUM, a product unit manager, who was the boss for that entire product. And that person was, and so you would have a group program manager who would report to that PUM. You would have the development manager who would report to that PUM, and you'd have the test manager who would report to that PUM. But all of them at least went up to that PUM. That one PUM had that was the person who made the decision, who ultimately would have to make the decisions, even though even they wouldn't want to make the decision unless everybody agreed. They were the one who was responsible. But a few years ago, they reorganized and changed it so that there was no PUM, no product unit manager. Instead, they now have trios. The group program manager, the development manager, and the test manager are all co-equal, and they have to, all three of them, agree on what's going to happen for the decisions to happen. So there's no single person now. Now it's just those three of those have to reach a consensus. So on the face of it, you would think, well, each of them have an equal say in what's going on. That is not true. And almost every group that I know of, the person who gets the short end of the stick is the test manager. Although in organizationally they're on par, and you'll even hear people give lip service to the test group. They're not. And I must say, I feel for test people, because they're really critical to the success of a product, but they get beat up all the time. But everyone's giving them lip service. You know, they'll never say anything bad about them, but they just always get the short end of the stick with what's going on. But I will tell you that when I was a program manager, I kept really close to my test team, because they were the ones who'd bail me out whenever anything went bad too. So I view they're critical, but they're not given a lot of love. And so program managers they have to be communicators. They're communicators par excellence, and the key attribute of any PM it's an attribute. I'm not saying I said salesmanship is maybe the most thing that you have to be the most successful at, is salesmanship. But an attribute of any PM is that you're generating this constant stream of status and updates and meetings. PMs generate more meetings than anybody, and you're sending out status mails, As soon as every meeting is done, you send out an email saying, oh, here's what we discussed in the meeting, and here's the actions of who's doing what. And that's, so as a program manager, you're generating all this status. And it's important to have all this data so everybody involved knows what's going on, and they see that you seem to be in control of this, so you must be the one who's driving things. You're the leader, so it helps you keep your leadership role by doing all of this status, and it makes sure that everybody's on track with what's happening, and it keeps and as I said, because it's a matrix organization, it just takes a lot of effort to keep all these different groups on the same page, because everybody could easily drift off. Because you can, not only do you have to make sure your group agrees on what you're doing, but almost invariably, any new product release you're working on, any product you're working on, will require that other groups in the company, other engineering teams, make commitments to do things for you to succeed. And so you have to make sure, not only do you have to, at the very beginning of the whole project, make sure that they agree to that, and that they say, yeah, we think this is a good idea for us to do, but all the way through the thing, you have to make sure you're constantly working with them, that they're on track with this. Because if you don't, I've seen it happen. They kind of go off on their own, and this wasn't a priority for them. They say, oh gosh, we just didn't really get to that. And so now you're screwed, because they didn't finish some things that you really needed for your product to work, and there's nothing you can do about it. So that's why it is important to do all of this. Now, I will say Microsoft has created a lot of tools internally, IT tools, databases, bug systems, to help you do a lot of this tracking. But then a lot of your job is doing data entry. You're entering in the status of these things into these tools, so that then managers or anybody can go and look. They can look at the whole project and see the red and green and where things are. But it gets more than that. It's like there's all this process that's come in where all throughout they'll say, well, this phase in the project you have to have made sure you've had legal reviews on things, and so then you have to have made sure you talk to lawyers and you got those checked in, and you have to input this into the database system. Yes, I've got the legal check off, and then you submit the documents that legal sent, and then you have to have security reviews, and you have to make sure you got the security things in there. So there's all these checklists of things you have to do to get your product done. So these tools, they help, but they also create work too, and so I mean, this may sound like I'm super negative on Microsoft, but I really enjoyed my 9 years there, and I learned a lot. But there is a lot of bureaucracy, and to a certain extent, I think it's unavoidable, because particularly, and again, I stress, I was in the Windows division, which is likely the biggest, most complicated software product on the planet. And there's no way you can go through a product release without a heck of a lot of coordination and process to make sure everything is lining up properly. But so there, I accept there's a reality that you have this, but it's not always fun either. So as a program manager, you typically will have a weekly meeting with all the key players of the project or product that you're working on. And when I say key players, these are things you identify who they are. You have to have identified who are the teams that I have deliverables that I need to have doing things for me. Then you make sure they're invited. You need, if you're really relying on marketing to help get some things ready so that they're ready when this thing ships, you should have a marketing person involved. In my case, I kept trying to get marketing people to come to my meetings. They wouldn't, so I tried. And then likewise, you want even documentation people. Get the documentation people coming. Have them come to the meetings. It's great to have them involved in knowing what's going on, so that they can be they know what's. The earlier you get them involved, the better. In fact, I've even had documentation people help me drive engineering efforts through the company in a way. When I was working on the Windows firewall, it became obvious that one of the things that people would need to know when we put the firewall on Windows Server, administrators would need to know what they would need, how to configure the firewall for the various things they would want to do, because you'd have to open the right ports and configure it for the various services. And so I did a little sales job. I convinced the documentation person that it was in his interest to create a database to track all of the different things that would need to be configured in the firewall. Then he spun up a whole project to go to all of the different groups in Windows Server and he built forms in a database that would ask them, what are your networking requirements that you need so that we can put this in the firewall? And then I used that data that he collected to build things for the firewall to make automatic configuration easier. So there's ways that you can leverage these people and work with them. So program managers are conformists. And you're expected to execute the vision and ideas of your managers and above, which sounds like this is contradicting my earlier point about it being a consensus organization. It is consensus within some general guidance things, and I'll give an example. One of the things I was working on as a program manager was IPv6, which is a new version of the internet protocol. Most everybody all the time uses IPv4. That's what most of the internet, anytime you're doing web browsing or anything, it's almost always over IPv4. IPv6 is the next version of that. It's in Windows. Most operating systems have it now, but it's usually not being used because the internet itself doesn't use much IPv6, but it's there for whenever the internet really starts using it in a big way. Well, there's a lot of questions as to whether IPv6 is something that one could argue, why sink a lot of resources into it since it's not really being used by anybody? But I know there were management directives saying this is something we need to support. We need to support IPv6. And so people who want it would not be a good career decision to go around saying we shouldn't be working with IPv6 and trying to build a case around not working with IPv6. That just wouldn't help you any. It was clear that this was something that senior managers wanted to do, and to go against that would well, ultimately, if you're such a good salesman that you can convince everybody that you're right, then I guess you would be aligned with your senior managers because they're aligned too. But I'll put it another way. It's easier to build consensus when you're going with the momentum of the broader organization. If the thing you want to do some of your ideas as a program manager doesn't mesh with the general culture or ideas of the broader organization that you're in, it's just a much bigger job to try to then realign everybody to build that consensus around the new thing. So it's just easier to build consensus around the areas that people want to go. I'm sure I've likely confused you all, but that's how it felt to me. And a question in the back?
How do you know what they want?
So the question is, how do you know what people want?
Well, no, the decision makers, do they actually say?
So the question is, how do you know what decision makers want? Do they tell you what they want? And they do, in some general terms. They'll say there's certain things they like or they're excited about, and with some VPs, they're more clear than others around some of those things. So yes, there are cases where you know what there are some hot buttons they have of things they like, and so it's always in your interest to cater to those things that they like, and be working on those things, and things that go against that. It's just a much bigger uphill struggle to try to change those kinds of things. But it's hard to describe, but there are currents of ideas that flow in certain directions. And I use IPv6 as an example again. There was no question that almost all the engineers and everybody, most of the people in the networking group liked IPv6 because it was cool, and there's a lot of things about it that you could get into big technical arguments of why it's good. And so that was it was a compelling thing for those groups. And people, and a lot of people at Microsoft and elsewhere, they like to think of the future. They think, well, wouldn't it be great if we could do all of these things? And the current technology, IPv4, is holding the whole industry back. We just can't live with this. We're Microsoft. We have to push we have to take leadership. We have to move things along. And I could see this from everywhere. It wasn't just my VP. This was coming from a lot of different angles. And so there are certain things you can glean. You can just feel the energy. That's what the feeling is in the groups. And so Microsoft strongly believes that program management and PMs are a core part of its success, and there's a firm belief that the way they do program management and the role of program managers is a unique thing that they have, and that it has been a big contributor to their success. And the program management role is highly coveted as a springboard to career advancement. I've known people who were engineers who decided they wanted to become program managers because they felt that was the way they could, if they wanted to move up higher in the organization, they wanted to show they were well-rounded, that they could understand all aspects of the business. So a lot of people want to become PMs. And as I've thought about this a lot, and I thought, well, some of this and there's a lot of senior people at the company too who you can point to and say they were program managers. I've never done a statistical analysis, but there are a lot of senior people at the company who had been program managers. Steven Sinofsky was a program manager. And I think the test group, there was I think the one person that they could point to was Brian Valentine before he left. So there's token for some other people. But so PMs are, it's a highly coveted position. But I thought about this, and I'm thinking that the fact that you can point to all these people who had career advancement as being PMs might be a self-fulfilling prophecy, because there's so many of the best people want to be PMs. If all your best people are PMs, then it makes sense that those are people who are going to get promoted and so on. So I don't know how much of that is true, but it's something I've thought about. And despite all of this and the culture of program managers in the company, mistakes still happen. So as much effort as goes into program management, and the company puts into thinking about how program management should work, I mean, there's lots of examples you can point to of things that didn't work out well, which isn't to say there aren't successes. I'm not trying to dump on the company, but if I was really going to give a balanced view of program management, it works. It can work as a part of the function at the company. But there are other companies that have successes and failures too, and they don't all have the exact same structure. So about the best I can say is that program management at Microsoft it's evolved that way. For what I've talked about today is something that's evolved over 25 years, and so it's not going to go away. So clearly anyone working at the company, that's the way things are going to happen. That's a core part of the company. I also think that it's a part of, I think Microsoft is more of an engineering driven company, and I think it speaks volumes that the program management function is in the engineering groups. It's in the engineering teams. And the program manager is supposed to have this big picture of understanding the market and so on. And I think it's no coincidence that many of the mistakes that Microsoft makes tend to be because it was engineering driven as opposed to customer driven on some things that they do. And I don't think it's a coincidence. And now there are other companies I can point to the exact opposite, and I can say, well, marketing really drives almost everything at that company. And that can sometimes be good, because maybe they're more customer oriented and really focused on giving what customers want. But on the other time, sometimes they're focused on the customer, but what they produce is garbage because there was no real thought behind how to build a good product. And so there's no perfect solution to this kind of thing. So if you're looking for a job,
After all you've said.
so after all I've said, if you're looking for job program management at Microsoft, I have some thoughts. And I will come back to say, it's not a bad career. I mean, there's a lot, you learn a lot. I enjoy doing it. I don't want people to come away from this discussion tonight thinking, oh God, that'd be the worst place ever to work, and I don't want to be a PM. That's not what I'm trying to put across. And I'm sure that you could do a Dummies guide for any role in any company, and you'd have some unflattering things to say about those roles too. So you got to look at it in the broad context. So now that you all want to be PMs at Microsoft, there's a lot of things you can do to find out what jobs there are, and there's networking things. I can talk about that too in the Q&A if you want to know about how to get plugged into roles and interview and get those interviews. But let's assume you found a role that you want to apply for and you're actually going in for an interview. So I'll sidestep all that stuff. And when you go in for an interview for a program management role, you want to talk a lot about your experiences and things you've done, and use those a lot in your interview. Now, some people can say, "Well, I don't have a lot of experience in program management." I've even interviewed people who were right from college, and so in their perspective, I don't have a lot of industry experience. I can't tell you big projects that I've done and stuff, but experience can be a lot of things. It's interesting when I'm asking questions, when I'm interviewing someone asking about some of the projects they've managed. It's really fascinating to hear that somebody helped put together a Boy Scout camp, and I want to hear the challenges of how they coordinated getting this big project done. I want to hear how they did that. So that can be interesting. So you think when you're trying to get your thoughts together, what experiences can you talk about in your interview? Don't just narrow yourself to a narrow technology area and assume you have to talk that way, because some of these skills are transferable. And so if you're talking like typical things that I would want to know when I was interviewing people is I want to hear how good are you at convincing groups of people to do things. So I'd like to hear how when you were putting together a church group there was all this dissent of what should happen and how you managed to get consensus behind doing something. I mean, that would be interesting to me. That gives me some insights as to how good you are in your skills in herding cats. So these things can be very helpful. Of course, if you have examples of how you did this in an actual tech situation, that's even better. But I'm just saying you can use other examples. And I've talked with people who were in grad school who worked on projects with some fellow students. And that was interesting too. And I would ask them. I start drilling into that and say, okay, well, how did you make sure that you had your major project was done on time? How did you make sure that you had the right requirements at the beginning? And so I start drilling into that kind of thing. So you can use those as examples in your interviews too. And when you're answering questions, often what's most important is the process you go through to come up with the answer. It's not the answer. It's the process. And so if somebody says, how would we build a good manhole cover? How would we build a good, and I would often pick something that they'd done, right? So if I'm interviewing somebody and they're saying, oh, I used to work in this kind of a business. I used to work in an auto body shop. And I would say, okay, how would you build a better machine to take dents out of doors? How would you how would you do it? What would that machine be? The worst thing you could do is start saying, well, the machine should do this, and it should do this, and it should do this. If you say that just is they'll tune out. You already proven you don't have what it takes to be a program manager. What they really want to hear you say is, well, I would do an investigation as to the problems that our people in the shop have. What are the defects that we have when they come out? I would do customer surveys And I would talk with our marketing group or the head office to see things. So they want to hear what you're going to do to come up with an answer to figure out how to build a better machine. So that's what's important. It's not the answer, it's the way you get to the answer. So that's a very important thing when you're interviewing for PM jobs. And they want to see that you understand the big picture. It's because we've talked about before, program managers need to get it. They have to understand all of it. They have to understand business needs and the engineering needs. So you don't want to go into the interview and come across as just being a super technical person, that you understand everything about C++ and about all the protocols that are being used and networks. That's all well and good, but the interviewer wants to know that you understand what the business needs are, or at least understand how to find out what business needs are. They want to, and that you understand those kinds of objectives. What is a successful product? So if somebody asks you, okay, well, what is a successful product? What would define success for you? And you could say, oh, there's no bugs. Well, that's a pretty narrow definition of success. We're making a lot of money from the product. That's really what matters. The bugs is kind of completely irrelevant, actually. So, so these are
that explains a lot.
Yeah. So, well, the bugs could be relevant in the standpoint if it would detract from making money. So that's where the bugs would be relevant. So those are some of the thoughts I have of some of the things that they really focus on in interviews. Now, there is one part of interviews that I can't really help you much on. And that is, and I've seen this, it's become more and more the case, and particularly in the recession, it's become even more so, that groups can become extremely picky on trying to get people who have direct experience in that particular thing they're working on. And if you don't have that experience of working with that particular thing, I can't help you. I mean, and if that group at Microsoft has decided that's what they want, then I don't know what to do. I can't give you any more help on that other than do your best on boning up on that technology or something, and as we can talk about in Q&A or whatever, before you go and interview for any of these jobs, you should have done some networking to contact other people in the company, and I'm even willing to help with doing some of that, so you could try to learn what their concerns are. And if you do hear that group really is concerned about some really deeply technical things or something, then you should do some reading about it to try to know about it before you go in there. But even before the recession, years ago, I can recall interviewing people who didn't have a lot of experience in some of the specific areas that we were working on, again, the networking thing. And in some of those things, like think of some network security protocols like IPsec, there's not a lot of people who work with those things in the industry. So your pool of people is pretty sparse. Even in a recession where there's a lot of people looking for jobs, some of these protocols and things are so highly specialized. I mean, maybe there's only 20 PMs in the world who've even managed projects with those kinds of things. But I can remember doing some interviews a few years ago where I would interview somebody who I thought would be a pretty good program manager, but the end conclusion was, well, we want somebody who has more experience in this thing. And I can think of specific examples where I think we made big mistakes. And we hired somebody who had the specific experience, but they really weren't a good program manager. And so I think that's a very short-sighted view myself, to be really focused on when you get so specific on the technology. Because I think if you're a good program manager, you can likely, if you've got, the most critical thing is to be good at all the program manager skills. And then you can bone up on the technology. You're not the guy who has to build this stuff anyway. So, although, I mean, even at Microsoft, as I said, there's huge variances between different program managers. And there are some that are very technical and some who could likely go and write the code themselves. And actually, I've seen that backfire. I've seen some program managers who would just decide they were going to write the code. And they start writing code. But then they're not really managing the project all that well. They're actually now in there doing stuff, but your job is to keep all these balls moving and stuff. And now if you've got your you're up to your neck in just making sure the code is done, then it's really hard for you to have a successful project too. So that is my presentation, and I have an appendix with a bunch of information here. Although the links don't help you in the handout, I will give the actual PowerPoint deck to Lynn and to Christy, so I assume they can distribute it to everybody, and you'll have the links. I've actually written an article on my blog, surkan.com, just my name.com, and that this whole presentation is based off of. It even has the same title. And so you can go look at that, and all these links are there too in that same article. You can go and look at that. And I will put in a little plug that I am betwixt jobs myself, and I'm looking for product management and program management roles. And I really love helping figure out how to build the right product and understanding markets and customers, and making sure that, and understanding what the product strategy should be. So I think that's likely more on the product management side for most companies, and that's what I really, really love doing. But it's interesting, even though I'm looking for a job, I'm also hiring. I've been out there trying to find volunteers to work on an equity basis to make some prototypes for some website ideas that I have. So I've been working. I was just going to the UW website today, and I was going to try to post some job listings there, kind of like intern thing. And I even went on Craigslist yesterday, putting things up there. I get all these offshore people offering to do work. So anyway, I'm keeping. I think I've never been busier than I have been since when I was all those years at Microsoft. I've been busier than ever recently. So that is my presentation. And Christy?
Yeah, you alluded to giving us a little bit more information on actually how to get an interview, because so many of us have applied online and never heard back. I mean, repeatedly.
So Christy asked, how do you get an interview at Microsoft? So there are ways to do it. There are things you can do. No guarantees. I mean, it's hard at the best of times, but I have some thoughts and some advice I can give. And many of my thoughts, by the way, are directly applicable to any employer. So all the jobs at Microsoft, they do post on their public website. So you go look at Microsoft.com/jobs, I believe. I think Careers works too. I think they've got a bunch of things. You go and you look there, just look at the jobs that are posted. You look at program management jobs. And so that tells you the openings. That's not 100% accurate. I absolutely know there are some jobs posted that aren't even real. And I also know that there are some jobs that they would hire if they find the right person, but they don't actually officially post it. So but I'd say 90% of the jobs there, 90% of the jobs that you'd see there are, that's 90% of the jobs that are there, other than the few that aren't really real jobs. And there's funny things that happen with that. I mean, sometimes they want to hire somebody internally, they already know who they want, but for legal requirements, they have to post the job. There are also cases where they were downsizing the organization and let a bunch of people go, and they didn't give them severances, and so then you'll list the position to show you were still trying to rehire, but then after 4 or 5 months you remove the job, and you say, well, we changed our requirements, but you really weren't ever planning on rehiring in the first place. So there's these kinds of things that happen, but by and large it's true. So then, once you found a job that you think this could be interesting, you want to do some networking, not the network protocol type, but we're actually talking with people, and find some people at Microsoft, and hopefully people in that group at Microsoft, to learn some more about the job. And good thing is there's even people in this room who work at Microsoft. I myself have lots of friends at Microsoft, and I've had numerous people come to me even and say, oh, could you help me find out something about this group or something? And I'd be able to. I don't mind asking. I've got some very good friends who, they don't mind at all just looking in the Microsoft directory to tell me who the managers are, or there's something about the group. And in many cases, I might even know some of those teams, but it is a big company, so I don't know everybody. And particularly if it's outside of Windows, I know better than most places. So certainly talking with some people, networking with people who you know who work at Microsoft, or who have spouses that work at Microsoft or something like that, that can be a starting point to get contacts. But now once you get a contact, what do you do then? Well, it's not very productive just to contact someone saying, hey, I want a job, and I noticed that there's this opening. Can you give me a recommendation for that job, or can you help me with that job? That doesn't help you too much. I mean, you can do the thing of asking for informationals. You can say, hey, I heard a bunch of things your group is doing. I noticed you make these products. It sounds really exciting to me. Would you mind if I met you for lunch sometime or talked on the phone a bit to ask about some of these things? And some people are willing to talk to you about that. And that then is a great opportunity for you to learn more. I'm going to tell you my I don't know, I should almost patent my strategy here, but I've got a pretty involved strategy to get contacts and to build the relationships that you would need to get really help within the organization in getting a job. But it's a long process. So the way you do it is this: you find the company that you want, that has positions in, that you're the company you'd like to work for. And in this case, we're talking about Microsoft. So you find that company, and in Microsoft's case, it's a huge company, so you have to be a little bit more narrow. You have to focus in on what area would you like to work in. Would it be Windows, or would it be something else? So then what you do is you say, okay, I'd like to work in Windows at Microsoft. Okay, I am now going to go and start writing some articles for a blog, for my own blog about Windows, and do some research about challenges Windows is facing, what people are saying about Windows 7, issues you've seen people bring up, and you come up with some ideas. You say, what article would I like to read? What can I not see out there right now of articles when I'm looking around Windows 7? What are things I'm not seeing? I would really like to see an article about something. So you write a list of several of these things. So now you've got some ideas of articles you want to write. So now what you do is you go to LinkedIn, or you go to friends that you know at Microsoft, but I'll use LinkedIn as a great example. I love LinkedIn. And you do a search for all the people, all Microsoft employees, and you just look at Microsoft and do a search, and you'll immediately start seeing who at Microsoft do you know. They'll show up there, but even it'll show you, LinkedIn will easily tell you if you have a friend who knows, if you have a mutual friend. Now, even if you don't have a mutual friend with somebody, let's say you find some people at Microsoft who look really interesting, you say, wow, this person is in the group. I can see that they're in the group that I'd like to work in. They're in the Windows group. This is a program manager. This is somebody I'd like to get to know. But you don't have a mutual friend. Well, what can you do? Well, look at their profile and see the group that they're a member of on LinkedIn. And it'll show the groups they're members of. Well, then go and join one of those groups. Now, once you're a member of the same group as them, you can send them an email. So now what you do is you email this person and you say, hey, I'm Susie, and I really love Windows, and it's something that's really exciting to me, and I'm writing some articles for my blog about Windows, and I was particularly interested in this particular aspect and some challenges that I've seen a lot of users having working with Windows with driver failures and stuff. Would you mind meeting for me with coffee or having a phone conversation to give me some extra insights for this article that I'm writing on my blog? Very few people will say no. Most people will be flattered that you want to talk with them about this. So maybe you approach 5 or 6 people. Don't just go with one. You can go to a bunch of people and approach them. And if you can get more than one person to agree to meet with you, all the better. So you go and you meet with all these people. You go and you talk with them over coffee or something. And at no point do you say you're looking for a job. You just say, I would love to, I just want to, and you're just talking about this technical issue or this thing you're talking about, and you get their feedback, and then you go back home, you write your article. And in your article, you cite the people who helped you and gave you advice, and you send them the link to then you follow up. You send back an email to this person, say thank you so much for meeting with me, and it really helped with my article, and here's the article. And then you go and you write them a recommendation on LinkedIn, and you say, wow, this person was so helpful and really helped me in understanding this stuff. Now at this point, if you now contact this person and say, by the way, I noticed there was a job in your group. Do you have any thoughts or ideas about that job, or do you know anything about what they're doing? I guarantee you that at this point, this person will help you. They will tell you lots about that job. And so this is a way to build relationships even in groups or companies where you don't know anybody. And it works, but it takes time. But I think that it does take time, but we're not talking years, we're talking months. And I think most job searches these days will take months. It's not something you're going to do in a matter of weeks. And I'm sure many of you have already heard that doing a job search from a spam approach of just blasting everywhere isn't that helpful. You really have to target anyway. So you should target some companies, several companies that you know you want to work with, that you think you'd really like to work for, and likely they're in the same fields. And so then you start this process. And you can leverage it across all of them. You don't just go, like when you're writing these blog articles, you don't just do it with one company. You could be using the same article as a reason to go and talk with people in a half dozen companies that are related in the same fields or something like that. So you go and talk with all these people about that. And so this is so yes, it will take several months to do this, but you're building good, solid relationships that will help you in getting those jobs that you want. So in the case of Microsoft, because there are already so many people in your organization, and you may know people who work there, it might be a little easier to find out who you need to find out who are the right contacts to get in touch with. But the same thing applies, because even if I gave you some names in a group, if you just cold called them and said you want information about a job, they're not going to listen to you. It's not going to help you any. You have to somehow build a relationship with them. Any other questions? Question back here?
My question has to do with the relationship between marketing and documentation. It seems to me that marketing is often its own little bubble. And what you said confirmed the hypothesis I have. What are they doing? I mean, what is the role of marketing? Did you view them as just collecting data to help you? Because, in some ways, the goal of marketing sounds much like
So the question is, what does marketing do at Microsoft, I assume? And are they just in their own little bubble, and do they really do anything of value? Because everything that I've talked about makes it seem as if marketing doesn't do anything. Well, marketing...
Well, how are they connected?
And how is marketing connected to the products? Well, as I mentioned, the program managers certainly want to pull marketing in to help with things. And in my specific cases, marketing wasn't helping me too much because those weren't things that they felt were had customer value propositions in it. But there were other areas where marketing would be all over it because they felt those were things that were going to be the bullet items on the box that they were going to be selling to customers, and so marketing would be all over that. Now, marketing's main purpose, though, is to help sell things. So they put together the collateral or the materials for selling the products for the salespeople. They put together all kinds of materials that salespeople know how to sell. They make sure that you've got all the good websites up there. They figure out the pricing strategies. They figure out they handle the channels, how the stuff is going to be distributed and be sold. So in any job, I mean, any program manager needs to get marketing involved because you need customer-ready material, right? If you have a product that's going out the door, customers are going to want to read about it before they buy it. They're going to want to understand how it compares to other products. If they go to the website, they're going to want to see like some neat comparisons, kind of a sales pitch. Why should I buy this product? Marketing puts that together. That is marketing's job, is to put that together. So marketing does that. So that is the kind of thing marketing does. Now, marketing in the past, at least in Windows, used to do a lot of customer research, where they would go and say, well, what do customers want? What are the features customers would like? Marketing is doing much less of that now. The research function is being pulled into the engineering teams. In fact, the last 2 years I was working actually as a product planner in the Windows division. So that was doing customer and market research, but it was in the engineering group. It wasn't in the marketing group, which further goes to my thesis that Microsoft is an engineering-driven organization. But in all honesty, I will say that when I was a program manager, I was often disenchanted with the support that I would get from marketing, and I know that many people in other program managers, even in groups that marketing was ostensibly supporting, almost nobody felt that marketing was giving them the research or data that was useful to them. Marketing would go and do a lot of customer research and data, but it would come back and it wouldn't help. It wasn't the kind of research that would give you data to make the decisions you needed to make in the engineering group. It would be maybe too general or something, and you need more specific kind of things to be able to make good decisions. So I will say that pulling the product planning into the engineering group has made it a little more effective, I guess. But now it's even more marketing. It's more engineering driven than it ever was, because now the engineers determine everything that's going to be researched. So I did that answer your question? Okay. As usual, I talked more than I needed to. So anybody else? Another question back there? Windows 7? Am I on 7? I'm running Windows 7 on this laptop. Yeah. Yes, I've written on my blog. You'll see an article about Windows 7. Yep. So, do I have any advice for how to find out which teams at Microsoft are the easiest to get into? I don't. The teams that are easiest to get into are the ones that are hiring. So I don't. Other than that, I don't have better guidance on it.
No, that was a pearl of wisdom right there.
I know. I know. I wish I had more guidance I could offer you on that. What I can say, career-wise, which is separate from just getting a job, it's more important. So let's say you get through the door and you're at Microsoft. Okay, you are a Microsoft program manager. For your long-term career, it's more important to be working for managers who are good managers and who are going places than it is to be working for managers who aren't. And so following the cool technology and the coolest things is not necessarily the best thing for your career. You should be following the good managers. That's where you should be going. And there are cases where some cool stuff is being managed by some very mediocre people. And the last thing you want to be is working for those mediocre people. So that I would say that in general. Now, you could say, well, that applies to trying to get a job in the beginning. Should I find out whether the VP is a mediocre VP and whether I should be trying to get in that group? Well, at this point in the game, there's not a lot of openings, period, so how picky do you want to be on that? So I guess my advice right now would be get your foot in the door wherever you can find the best place to get your foot in. And then once you're there, there's always reorgs happening. Whatever you get hired to do today, you won't be doing that in 2 years anyway, maybe even a year. So once you're there, you keep on your toes. You look around at what you want to get a lay of the land. Who's the managers, where, and how are they perceived in the company, and then you jockey to get in those groups that you feel would be good. A question up front?
How are contractors viewed as far as getting employment? If you go in as a contractor, is Microsoft pretty flexible about then looking at hiring?
So the question is, how is working as a contractor a good way to get a job at Microsoft? And this is, actually that's a great suggestion. I should have mentioned it. Working as a contractor is a great way to build relationships inside the company, and if they really like contractors, it does happen that they hire them. So that is a good strategy, a good thing to do, but most contractors don't get hired, clearly, and not just because they're bad people, because there's just, and particularly these days, there's relatively few openings anyway. So even if they really love you, it doesn't mean that that they have a position that they could offer you.
But stay in touch, because
Yeah.
when they do, yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So we're done? Are we out of time? Christy?
Yeah, I usually we go till 8, but we started late, and everybody was so interested and had questions. I think this has been awesome, Michael. Thank you.
You're welcome.